Despite losing Fred VanVleet, the Toronto Raptors had a perfect day one of free agency as the team brought back Jakob Poeltl, where there's rumors he could potentially be on his way out. Additionally, we didn't handcuff ourselves to any major contracts, and when we did lose Fred VanVleet, who earned himself a massive contract with the Houston Rockets, the team quickly filled a hole by bringing in Dennis Schroeder on a very solid contract as well. So lots of stuff to break down from day one of NBA free agency regarding the Toronto Raptors. So without further ado, let's just jump into the first topic of discussion. The first thing we're taking a look at is Jakob Poeltl returning to the Toronto Raptors on a reasonable contract. Now, Riker and I, we went live for hours there during this year's free agency, the start of it, everything that was going on. So if you want to see our live reactions, you can definitely check out those videos. Certainly a fun watch, but wanted to make a little more digestible video and breaking down everything that went down rather than just the raw live reactions. And probably the biggest move regarding what the Toronto Raptors did make rather than what they didn't do, is re-signing Jakob Poeltl, bringing him back on a very solid contract. As Woj came out saying that Jakob Poeltl agreed to a 4-year, $80 million contract to stay with the Toronto Raptors. So, the deal also includes a player option at the end of this contract. So, Jakob Poeltl coming back on this type of money is right about what we expected. And first things first, I'm just happy to say that Yak is back. I almost threw up in my mouth a little bit last night when I read the reports he might go down to San Antonio after we gave up a lightly protected first-round pick and a couple second-round picks to get him at this year's trade deadline. That only made sense if you're going to bring back Jakob Poeltl on a longer-term deal. We saw Nikola Vucevic get roughly the same contract, $20 million per season. His was for 3 years, Yak's for 4, but, in a similar range, center, big man, Vucevic is a better shooter. Poeltl's a better defender. Makes sense that that's a market value for Jakob Poeltl. We said, the $18 to $20 million range is reasonable for Big Yak. We need a center. We need someone that can bang down low with the Joel Embiids of the world, with Giannis driving into the paint, full head of steam. Right, the Raptors defense looked a lot better with Poeltl being out there, commanding the 5, and the team just makes a lot more sense with a natural center on the roster that is proven, right? We have guys like Christian Koloko, who's a raw development piece. We have guys like Chris Boucher and Precious Achiuwa that are coming along, but again, aren't natural centers, better off as 4s, in today's NBA, even though we're moving to a little bit of small ball. So having a center that can match up with the bigs across the league, night in, night out, is huge. Now, $20 million for a guy that some people may argue is unplayable down the stretch of important games because of his lack of free throw shooting. Yes, that is something to factor in. That is something to discuss and to bring up, but pretty well, with the exception of maybe 3 or 4 centers in today's NBA, you're going to get some major holes in terms of all-around performance, whether it be the inability to guard the pick and roll, whether it be free throw shooting, as we see with Jakob Poeltl, floor spacing, something like that, right? Whether it be just inability to protect the rim. Even if they can move a little bit quick, they might be smaller, or the opposite, they can't move around at all, so they get hunted in these mismatches, right? Pretty well every center in the NBA, with the exception of the MVP candidates, they all have their flaws. So, and the $20 million per range is usually the going rate. So the Toronto Raptors want to compete, not have the same issues we ran into year after year as we tried that 6'9" vision for this squad, right? We need to bring back Jakob Poeltl, and this was the price. So this is a W for Masai Ujiri, bringing back Jakob Poeltl on this sort of deal. Happy to see that it happened. And, Big Yak, look at his stats for this season. I mean, Jakob Poeltl, 12 points per game, 9 rebounds, 3 assists. He's a good facilitator in the mid-post for the Toronto Raptors. Shot 63% from the field. Finished around the rim, 1.2 blocks tonight, got a steal. The blocks and steals numbers don't indicate how strong a defender he is. He can positionally protect the rim very effectively for this Raptors squad. So, my opinion, massive W there for the Toronto Raptors. And maybe not a W for the Toronto Raptors directly, but a W for a Toronto Raptor as Fred VanVleet walked away for massive money. Now, this was foreshadowed. I guess it was talked about a bunch. We made probably 4 or 5 videos covering the latest about the Houston Rockets, willing to give a big offer to Fred VanVleet in order to ensure him going down there. Ime Udoka talked about wanting to bring in championship-tested players. Guys that could come in, be a leader, and do all these types of things. And Fred VanVleet, the Woj bomb hit, and it was a Woj nuke. One of the bigger Woj bombs since, the Kawhi Leonard stuff that happened in 2019. But basically, news came out that Fred VanVleet agreed to a 3-year, $130 million contract with the Houston Rockets. And this is the first max contract dealt out for the summer. And Fred VanVleet, love this man as a player, love this man in terms of what he provided for this Toronto Raptors team, his story being undrafted, a guy that we were sort of screaming out on videos as Raptors fans, hey, he's fighting with the Canadian Brady Heslip. It doesn't matter, your 14th or 15th guy. Take the Canadian. He's a shooter. He played for a school with a highlight colored jersey, right? I remember those days, right? And then we ended up taking Fred VanVleet, who no one really knew anything about, the 15th men back then. And then Fred VanVleet earned his way into the rotation. He earned his way onto that bench mob, earned his way into being a starter on this squad, was a key piece during our championship run, became an all-star for the Toronto Raptors, was given the reins, even though things didn't work out with Fred VanVleet being the number 2, number 1B option for this squad, right? Not that they didn't work out. He wasn't horrific. The team didn't have much winning, under that sort of tenure of Fred VanVleet and Pascal's sort of commanding this roster. But, Fred VanVleet had a remarkable career as a Toronto Raptor, and now he's getting paid the big bucks. Bet on yourself, $43 million per year. There was no world where the Toronto Raptors were going to match that money, but with all that, everything I said about Fred, it just wasn't going to work out with that type of bag coming in for Freddie VanVleet. I mean, last season, 19 points per game, 7 assists, solid box score numbers there, 4 rebounds, but 34% from behind the three-point line, 40% from the field, below 40%, right? Like, that just wasn't going to work out. He's getting torched on defense every now and then. Some people are already calling it the worst contract in the NBA, but you know what? It doesn't matter because Fred VanVleet, he earned that money, right? He's getting it. I'm happy to see Toronto Raptors get paid, and if it's on overpriced deals, given the consensus of the league, I'm happy it's with another organization. The Raptors aren't handcuffed, so it's a nice win there, even though the Toronto Raptors are certainly going to have a downgrade at the point guard position going into next season, unless Scotty Barnes gets moved to the point and things work out, or maybe Dennis Schroeder really takes this game to the next level. But, we had our initial reactions to it. It's a lucrative deal. It's a very, very big contract. I wouldn't have been comfortable if the Toronto Raptors gave it to him, but I'm very happy Fred VanVleet got that money. Wishing him success, the best, everything on that front. Things didn't work out his final season, but that's not how we're going to judge the legacy of Fred VanVleet in Toronto. Riker and I briefly discussed that he's probably a top 2 point. Lowry's number 1, clearly, but probably the number 2 point guard. You can argue Jose, Damian Stoudemire, Alvin Williams, these types of dudes, but I'd probably put Fred VanVleet as the second best point guard in Raptors history. So, great stuff there. Amazing career with the Raptors. I'm sure he'll be able to, take that group with the Houston Rockets and do some things down there. So congrats to Fred VanVleet. Congrats to the Toronto Raptors for not dishing out a bunch of money and handcuffing them to a point where they won't be able to bring back OG, Gary, and Pascal next summer. But that leads us into our next big topic. As when Fred VanVleet left, there was a big hole left on the roster, and the Raptors came in and signed Dennis Schroeder almost immediately, like 10, 15 minutes after Fred VanVleet left. Another Woj bomb came out, basically saying that the Toronto Raptors have brought in Dennis Schroeder on a 2-year, $26 million contract to join the Toronto Raptors. So, Dennis Schroeder, for people that don't know, is a guy. He almost got a very lucrative extension from the LA Lakers, turned it down, was regarded as a bag fumbler, bounced around the league a little bit, but kind of rejuvenated his career this most recent season back with the LA Lakers, and now got himself a solid contract with the Toronto Raptors. And this most recent season for the LA Lakers had a solid year, 13 points per game, 5 assists, 2 rebounds, right? The 3-point shooting isn't that consistent for Dennis Schroeder. It's not something you're going to look at and say, hey, he's going to be a knockdown shooter, but he plays really solid defense. He can slash. He's not like a Ben Simmons out there where they just sag off him and let him shoot threes and all these types of things. He's a player that, if you really look back 4 seasons ago, had an amazing season with the Oklahoma City Thunder, had a really solid start to his initial Lakers career, but, could potentially get that magic back. He ended up starting over D'Angelo Russell in the playoffs this most previous season, for the closeouts, for the important games for Schroeder. Riker and I talked about how he looked intense on defense. He moves out there quick. He brings energy to the game, which is something you want to see out of a team that's not trying to rebuild. We're trying to stay in contention. That's why we brought back Jakob Poeltl, right? That's Jakob Poeltl did not want to be on a rebuilding squad, right? He wanted to come back on this Raptors team and hopefully turn things around and contend. So, Dennis Schroeder, whether he's starting, whether it's going to be Scotty Barnes at that starting point guard spot, Schroeder's going to have a serious role. And the Raptors, we don't have anyone truly reliable just yet. Malachi Flynn has certainly had his ups and downs as a Toronto Raptor backup. It's tough to really get minutes when you're in the Nick nursery most of the time, but, he might have his opportunity this season. Jeff Doughton, right, looked great in flashes last season, but still we don't have a great sample size to prove Jeff Doughton's going to be a full-time guard, guaranteed player, even though I'm high on the guy. And then Delano Banton's probably on his way out, right? We don't have a lot of depth at that guard spot, so bringing in Dennis Schroeder is a big W for the Toronto Raptors. So let me know what you guys think about all these Toronto Raptors moves on day one. I think the Toronto Raptors put themselves in a very difficult situation, given how things played out in recent years. We tried to make a push. We tried to become a win-now team, but things didn't end up working out great. At least this most recent season didn't make the playoffs and stuff, but the team didn't tear things down. They didn't have a lot to work with, but I think they made the most with what they could have. And didn't make any horrific decisions. And the decisions that they did make to do won't have a negative impact long-term. They're only like high upside moves. So great stuff with the Toronto Raptors. Big things to come for this team come this offseason. So if you want to stay up to date with everything, hit that subscribe button. It means the world to me. Anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.